evening, and welcome back to the Imaginary Gallery. It is TJ, your host. We are in Lundy Bancroft's book called Why Does He Do That? Inside the Minds of Angry and Controlling Men. The next section I'll be discussing would be the process of change. Now, if you've been watching these videos and you've determined that your partner is a creature, is a cluster B monster, some of this may not apply, but the hope is that you're mistaken and that any red flags you saw were a coincidence and that you've really got yourself a great guy. As far as this book goes, it's a guy. Let's begin. And as usual, starts with some quotes.
Since he started going to therapy, he's gotten more self-centered than ever.
I think this time he's really sorry.
He's usually very closed off to all of his feelings. It gives me some kind of hope that he's finally opening up a little. Our couples counselor says that we both have to be willing to make changes in ourselves.
Do you think he can change? I'm not sure how long I want to wait around to see if he's gonna or not.
Bancroft tells us that in his numerous 15-plus years of working daily with abusive men, it's left him certain of one thing. And then he actually lists more than one thing. He says there are no shortcuts to change, no magical overnight transformation, no easy ways out. Change is difficult and very uncomfortable work. His job as a counselor is to delve into the elaborate tangle that makes up this abusive person's thinking and to try to assist this creature to untie its knots. Then he states this project is not hopeless, as long as the man is willing to work hard, but it's very painstaking, it's very complex, because for him, remaining in his abusive ways is many times easier than stepping out of this pattern he's used to. Yet there are some men who actually decide to reach down deep inside of themselves, tear out the values that drive their abusive behavior, and develop a truly new way of interacting with their lady partner. Switch the pronouns around if you're not man-woman couple. The challenge for an abused lady is to learn how to tell whether her partner is serious about overcoming its abusiveness. So he's going to be positive now and assume positive intent that this person does want to change, and he says that the very first challenge with an abusive person is to motivate it to work on itself. Because he becomes attached to the many rewards that his controlling and intimidating, horrifying behaviors brought it, it's highly reluctant to make any kind of significant changes in its way of operating in a relationship. And this type of reluctance can simply not be overcome through gentle persuasion, honey, I really wish you wouldn't be abusive, pleading, or cajoling by the lady. And Bancroft is sorry to say that not once has he ever seen such an approach succeed. The men who do make progress in his programs are the ones who know that their partners are really going to leave if they don't change themselves. And the ones who are on probation, who've got a tough probation officer who demands that they really confront their abusive behavior. In other words, the initial impetus to change is always extrinsic rather than self-motivated. Even when a man does feel genuinely sorry for the ways he's hurt its partner, he's never seen this remorse alone suffice to get this man to become a serious client. After several months of deep work in the program, some men do start to develop intrinsic reasons for change, such as beginning to feel empathy for the partner's feelings, or gaining awareness of how their behavior has been harming their kids, or even sometimes realizing that they themselves enjoy life more when they are not abusive, despite all of the privileges of abuse that they have to give up. But it takes a long time for an abusive person to get to that point. Now, as Bancroft tells us he discussed in the introduction, the majority of abusive men do not make deep and lasting changes, even in a high-quality abuser program. However, If even a minority become non-abusive, or at least significantly less abusive, then he feels his job is worth doing. At least as important is that the program can help the abused lady develop clarity about her partner's abusive patterns and manipulation, and can share insights with her. Then he gives us an example. An abusive man's underlying attitudes tend to leap out of him in the heat of debates and confrontations in his group, and the counselor can then assist the woman in identifying the thinking that's driving that behavior. Follow-up surveys by abusive programs have found that the support that the counselors give to her tends to be the aspect of the program that the lady finds most valuable. These type of surveys indicate that an abuser program that's not focused on supporting the woman and that does not consider serving her to be its primary responsibility is very limiting as far as what it can accomplish, and may even be contributing to her difficulties. Now, for an abusive man to make a genuine progress, he needs to go through a complex and critical set of steps, which would involve self-reflection. If it's a cluster B monster, good luck. To give his clients a roadmap of the process of change, he tells them the following story. There was once a man whose neighbors had a large and beautiful maple tree that was growing right behind their home. It provided shade in the hot summer, and it turned into beautiful colors of fire in the fall, and dropped its leaves and stood against the winter snow in a magnificent sculpture of wood. But the man hated his neighbor's tree because the shade that it cast into his yard made his grass grow too quickly and stunted his vegetable garden, which happened to be his passion. He pressured the neighbors repeatedly to either cut that tree down or prune it drastically, and their response was always the same.
You're free to cut any branches that stick out over your property, but beyond that we're going to leave the tree alone because it's beautiful and we love it. Sorry about the shade it casts, but that's what trees do.
One summer, the neighbors went away on vacation for a week. So this man decided to rid himself of this aggravation. He took a chainsaw and cut that tree next door to the ground, making careful cuts so that the tree wouldn't fall on the neighbor's house and destroy it, but also making sure it didn't go towards his own yard, so he wouldn't have to clean it up. How thoughtful. Then he walked home, fully satisfied, if perhaps a little scared. The next day he took that chainsaw, threw it in the dump, and prepared himself to deny having any idea who had brought the giant down, even though the truth was going to be obvious. There was only one hole in this plan. He didn't realize how popular his neighbors were, and he didn't know how unbearable it would be to have the entire local population turn against him, to the point where no one would ever even speak to him in public. So the day finally came when the man realized his life would be wrecked for good unless he dealt with his destructive and selfish acts. What steps did he have to take in order to set things right? So here are the steps that he needs to go through to accept responsibility. Number 1, he had to admit fully that he did cut down that tree. He dreaded looking at people and saying,
"Yeah, it was me,"
even though they already knew, but he had to do it. He had to stop claiming that the neighbors had cut the tree down themselves so that they could blame him for it and turn everybody against him. And when he did admit his act, he also had to acknowledge what an old and impressive tree he had murdered, rather than try to save face by insisting it was small or it was fugly. Number 2, he had to admit that he cut it down on purpose, that his actions were an actual choice. He couldn't claim that he was drunk and enraged and just didn't know what he was doing. He couldn't say, "Well, I meant just to put a tiny little cut into the trunk, but then I cut too much and it fell over." In short, he had to stop making excuses. Plus, he had to admit that he had goals that he tried to further through this destructive behavior. He had to be honest about his motives. Number 3, he had to acknowledge that what he did was wrong. This meant that he had to stop blaming the neighbors for playing up how victimized he had been by the shade. He had to make a sincere and a heartfelt apology. Number 4, he had to accept the neighbor's right to be angry at him about what he'd done, which meant that he had to be willing to truly acknowledge the effects of his actions. He had to take in the anguish he'd caused. He had to stop asserting that they were making too big of a deal, and they should be over it by now. Although apologizing was important, he also had to accept that saying he was sorry was only the beginning, and it meant nothing unless he also looked fiercely at the damage he had done. Number 5, he had to accept the consequences of his actions. First, he had to provide a reasonable amount of money to cover the damage for the value of the destroyed tree. He also had to plead guilty to the criminal charges, so the neighbors would not have to go through the ordeal of testifying against him. He had to stop seeking sympathy from others for the problems he had caused all by himself, along the lines of, "Oh, poor me, I had to pay all this money that I just don't have because their tree, and the only reason I cut it was because they were wrecking my yard with it." Number 6, he had to devote long-term and serious effort towards setting right what he had done. No amount of money can replace a mature tree, and there isn't any way you can erase the effects of such a destructive act as far as the effect it has on the people in the home. Therefore, this man has to make amends. He needed to buy as large and healthy of a young tree he could find in the nursery and plant it carefully behind the neighbor's home. What's more, he had to water that tree, protect that tree from deer, wash it for diseases, and fertilize it for years, because a young tree takes a long time to establish itself. Number 7, he had to lay aside demands for forgiveness, which means recognizing that even if he sincerely were to take all the steps he's just given, the neighbors might still be left with pain, hurt, and bitterness. And this man had no right to tell them how long those feelings should last, especially when he's the one who caused them. People might be nicer to him now that he's stopped denying what he's done, but they won't necessarily ever like him. The neighbors might not ever want to be friends with him. Why should they want to be? If they did decide to be friendly at some point, he should see the forgiveness as an act of kindness and not as his due for respecting the tree. Number 8, he had to treat the neighbors consistently well from that point forward. He couldn't decide to be evil to them after 5 years by cutting down a rose bush and then say, "Oh,
Okay, I messed up. Shouldn't I get some kind of credit for the 5 years I've been good, though? You can't expect me to be perfect."
asking somebody not to cut down the neighbor's flowers is not the same thing as expecting perfection. Number 9, he had to relinquish his negative view of the neighbors. He had to stop speaking horribly about them, other people, and accept that most, maybe even all, of what he disliked about them actually had to do with their responses to the damage he'd done and their refusal to be bullied by him. He had been the creator of all this hostility towards himself. So as Bancroft goes over each of the responsibilities with his clients, he asks them if they have any kind of disagreement. They concur that each of the above steps is fair and necessary as long as we're talking about trees and neighbors. However, as soon as you go back through that story revealing how each piece applies to the man who's abused the partner, the clients begin backpedaling. They're reluctant to do the serious work of change, feeling it'll be easier to throw a new blanket over the moldy mattress and carry on with life as usual. Next will be how these steps apply to abuse. Stay tuned.
Hi, I am the Narcopath. You probably don't remember me. TJ says I've got to try to reach all my audience. So far I've tried to focus on the ones that I scammed into loving me. But there were some of you out there that didn't take my bait. One of you in particular. Remember how we met so innocently in our high school classroom? We listened to music together after class. I complimented you on your haircut, and you complimented me on my teeth. I thought it was going to work with us. Plus, I knew your parents were rich, and I knew they'd probably leave you some of that, so I tried to date you. I first just acted casually. We went out here and there as friends. But I knew I had to make my move. Someone else might grab you, and I couldn't have that. After I did my preliminary work on you, you were the one. At least financially and circumstantially. I tried to tell you on several occasions. After we spent the afternoon together, I was telling you how much I felt for you and how, I really want to be your girlfriend. And you weren't having it. I don't know what the problem was because, face it, who would turn this down for a girlfriend? Nobody in the right mind. So there's something wrong with you there, too. You told me you just wanted to be friends, and I thought, well, that's fine. and I figured I'd show you someday what you're missing out on. Didn't actually work that way. Instead, you asked me to join you to your nightclubs that you like to go to. I stopped saying the love stuff because it was just too humiliating. I just thought, well, I'm going to show you. Do you notice how you told me that in your class the next semester there was a really hot gal in there? You wanted to date her? You were excited about her? You wanted to go out to the place she hung out at, but you didn't know anybody there, so me, your trusty friend, you asked, would I go with you? Well, of course I would. So I went with you to see this gal. I just acted like I was happy for you, even though I would have ripped her heart out. But instead, I met her. I was my usual fake, charming self. The moment you excused yourself to go to the restroom, I made my move. That's right. I went to her, I told her that you were just a friend of mine and that I couldn't help looking at her beautiful eyes from the moment I walked in, and some other stuff I got from movies. And she fell for me. That's right. I told her I'm a lesbian. I'm just here with him for fun. He's queer. He doesn't like girls. He's not ready for a relationship with anyone. But I am. Would you like to go out sometime? And she, of course, said yes. You didn't know any of this, so it was perfect. Next time you called me, I was busy, and I was with her, and you wondered why. Like you didn't know her last week, and now you're her best friend? Because I started being with her every time you called. You deserved it. You turned me down. I don't accept that. Because you turned me down, I took away the girl you wanted. I'm smarter than you, anyway. You forgave me when it didn't work out later, and asked me again to join you for yet another chick that you thought was sexy. What did I do? Say, oh, nothing like last time. I don't know how that happened. She forced me. She must have some kind of mind control going on me. Well, exact same thing when you had to go to the restroom. I made my move, and like clockwork, we had plans the next night we didn't tell you about because you might get mad. We couldn't have you getting upset. We're in control of your emotions. So I turned her into a lipstick lesbian like me, and we got it on all night and laughed about you and how small your little thing is. You blew it. You will never turn down the Narcopath and get away with it.